All right, thank you so much, Kevin. And next we have Jeff Carroll to talk about a scaled wood economy. So take it away, Jeff.
All right, buddy, thank you. I'm a big believer that we don't learn much if we just sit around and talk about the things we all agree on, right? We need to, every once in a while, engage in some intellectual discord, right? Something that says, wait a minute, that doesn't sound just right, or I'm not sure I agree with that, but it'll force us to think through this a little more carefully. And one of the things that I'm convinced of is when we start looking at biochar is that we've got a lot of business models out there that are not succeeding. And we know it's a problem. We know that there's too many efforts to go into the biochar business that ultimately end with people going out of the biochar business. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, but before I jump into that challenge question of maybe we have a flawed business model, I'd like to introduce a little bit about who we are. So does this just roll for me? Oh, look at that. Unified Wood Economy is a nonprofit consultancy, and our whole mission is devoted to those four things. We believe we need to make a commitment to capturing carbon, but as we're capturing that carbon, we can be upcycling wood in that process so that we can actually add value to a waste stream product. And when you do that, you capture revenue, right? If you do this right, you can actually capture revenue, and with that capturing of revenue, we can create jobs. It was that piece of this equation that actually kind of pulled me into this space. How do we take and intercept the waste stream in an efficient way so that we could create jobs from that value that was created? But if it's really going to make a difference, we've got to scale this impact. I was engaged in a project in Baltimore City where we were taking down houses that had been vacant and abandoned for a long time. And we were pulling out the wood from the floor joists and the flooring, and we were also harvesting the brick from these old buildings. And in the course of doing that, we were able to harvest about 1 million board feet of lumber. We harvested about 1.5 million bricks, put them back into the marketplace, employed 200 people over the course of an 8-year contract. And I thought, that's a really good project, right? I mean, that was a cool thing to do. We got lots of press, a lot of ink. And then I took a step back and I looked at the magnitude of the problem, how much material is going into landfills or is being reduced to its lowest value product. Mulch has its place in the world, but it's just the lowest value product we can create with wood waste. How could we have a much more significant impact on the magnitude of the problem? And even when I came to that realization and thought, man, all this good work we did and we don't even show up on the radar screen as a vessel of impact in this thing, how big would it have to be? And as I began to move into this space of looking at wood waste and the wood waste stream and how it's not really the material that's coming out of buildings. It's all these trees that are coming down in municipalities and community and urban environments. And so when I got to look at how much of that material was there, and as I explored further, found that number kept going up. Here in the Twin Cities area, does anyone know what the wood waste volume is? Right now, it's about 600,000 tons annually, wood waste. Now, about 250,000 of that gets used at District Energy, and I'm sure many of you love that place if you're in the tree removal business. But the bottom line is that when we look at just this one city at 600,000, we have a project that's up and running in Memphis, Tennessee, and in that area we're approaching about 1 million tons annually of wood waste in the Shelby County region, larger metro Memphis. It's a massive amount of material. And not only is that all material from trees that have faithfully, captured carbon throughout their existence, but once they come down, if they're left to rot, if they're left to decay, or if they're incinerated, or even if they're turned into mulch, which is going to sit on the ground, suck all the nitrogen out of the soil, and then rot and release its carbon, right? It's really not a solution to carbon capture. So when we say 50 million tons of wood waste annually across the United States coming out of municipalities, that doesn't really count the larger metro areas, and even when you move out into more rural areas where there's a tremendous amount of wood waste because of the way our markets are shifting around utilization of pine, other softwoods. I'm sure you're aware of the fact that in some of our forests in the southeast, they'll high grade a forest, take out all the valuable hardwoods, pile up the softwood, and set it on fire. That's what's happening. All that material is being lost, and we'd love to be able to reach into that waste stream and pull that product back into the economy, to have it add revenue, capture carbon, create jobs, and do it at scale. So we're losing the carbon, we're losing the economic value, we're losing the potential jobs. We could start, this is not a silver bullet, this is not a way to solve all the problems, as Jim Dotson said, that that their project will solve all of the emissions problems of Minnesota. No, it won't do that, but it's a way to contribute, it's a way to start the process. And so we got committed to looking at how we could develop a business model that took what has historically been seen as a liability, an externality for the land clearing and the arboricultural communities, and figure out a way to process that material into products of value. And we started out, like so many urban and community wood operations, looking at lumber, right? You got all this beautiful stem wood, these hardwoods that come down in neighborhoods. Getting that turned into high-value lumber seemed like a smart thing to do, but then you realize that's like 20, 22, 25% of the tree. At the end of the day, by the time you have the mill waste and all the rest of the tree that doesn't get used, it does not represent the vast majority of the volume of that wood. And so you have to find things for what we called the low value but high volume biomass. Branches can't be milled, limbs, the leaves, everything else from the tops of the tree, everything that goes beyond that stem wood. And that's when I went beyond lumber and said, what are some other products that we can create that would consume the entire tree? Because if we could consume the entire tree, if we could create a campus where the land clearers and the arborists and all the people that are producing all of this wood waste could bring the entirety of their wood waste to one place, then we'd get the logs that we could mill into the lumber, which still brings us our best price point. And we'd also get some of that better woody mass material that could be either turned into firewood or, as I began to discover and am now kind of infatuated with, turn it into biochar. And then the rest of it could be composted. And I thought we could have really high-grade materials in all three of those product lines, all on one campus. And that campus would turn into a zero-waste facility, everything getting utilized. And what would happen eventually is that because you're taking what has historically been seen as an external cost center, right? Something that you have to deal with as an arborist or as a land clearing company, and you're starting to put value on it. And the better we develop these markets to turn that material into product over here that has escalating value, we are actually by default assessing value back on what has been considered a waste product. And now it's worth it at our facility in Memphis to take all that material that is stem wood and firewood quality, which would be biochar quality wood, at no cost. So there's no tipping fee to drop off logs and the big limbs. The rest of it, yeah, we have to be able to grind all that stuff and turn it into a lower value product, so we charge a tipping fee for it, but it's fairly inexpensive. And the guys that are dropping off all that wood waste, they pull onto that site. We have a 43-acre site, but we're actually using about 10 acres of it. They can pull on with their trucks, usually in tandems. They drop their logs, they drop their brush, and they're gone in 15 minutes. And if you're in the wood tree removal business or in tree care business, being on and off a dump site that fast and only had to pay for a fraction of your load, it's a win. And so now all of a sudden, source is not that big of a challenge. We can get the wood we need. But you've got to be able to have products that utilize all the tree. So my next thing was, how do we make sure that we can sell all that stuff? Because one of the things I'm confident of, and having been the starter of enterprises in days gone by, I never enter into a project without understanding sources and uses. I've got to know that I've got enough material coming in to sustain the product line I'm about to create, and I got to have enough users on the back end that say they're going to buy the stuff that I'm going to create. And if I don't have those two things, you do not have a justifiable business model. And yet I think we've had a couple of things happen in the biochar world that have introduced what I would consider a fundamental flaw in how we approach this particular product. And it's because we get so excited about the carbon capture potential, right? And then what did the Microsofts and the Googles and the Metas all do? They started talking about carbon credits. And I am not against carbon credits. I love them, actually. But what I do know is that too many business models didn't get built around sources and uses. They got built around production and carbon credits. And the problem is, if you can't move the material, if you cannot sink that carbon, then the credits are no good, and you go out of business eventually, and the people investing get more and more disheartened and cynical about these kinds of operations that are promising long-term production of biochar. So what has fundamentally made us vulnerable to that model, rather than just saying what is the best way to have a sources and uses approach and look at carbon credits as icing on the cake? Let's develop a real business model that actually works. One of the things, and I've already mentioned this, so I'm going to move past that slide, but one of the things that kind of struck me is that I grew up in central Maine in the logging industry, grew up near a paper mill. You know, the most valuable wood product is per ton? It's toilet paper. And you know, I had a friend of mine who was a logger say, if you don't like cutting down trees, try plastic toilet paper, right? Toilet paper is the most valuable thing you can make out of wood per ton. But you know what you can't do with toilet paper? You cannot ship it very far because it's too light and big and bulky, and you can't get enough of it on the truck to make it worth sending it a long way. Does that remind you of anything else? Biochar cannot be shipped a long way. It has to have a local market. Otherwise, it's already an expensive product, isn't it? I mean, it's one of the things everybody complains about. It costs a fortune to make something because the equipment's expensive and the process is very delicate and it takes a learning curve. And you know, not everybody's got a gym done in the back, you know, in their city to help them walk through that. So a lot of these businesses don't have a way to make this at an affordable price, and then because of not having the idea that I've got to be able to sell all this stuff locally, they end up having to ship. And once that happens, the price goes too high and you can never sell it at volume. There's always going to be somebody out there who will say, well, I sold some biochar for $2,000 a yard. You did that once, maybe. You did not do that every day of the week last week. Anyone who's talking about those numbers is selling something, right? That is not happening. At best, the market may sustain $140 a yard, maybe up to 200 in some places, but you're not seeing numbers beyond that. That's not happening, right? So what does that mean? We got to be able to produce this stuff in a way that we can produce it and distribute it for something underneath that number, or what happens? We go out of business. We can't stay in the game. And so one of the ways we have to do this is by not outproducing our local market. Sometimes, because people have been driven by the carbon credit hope, they try to produce as much of this stuff as they can with the hope of getting the carbon credits, but then you got to ship it. We need to produce the amount that can be sustained locally and still maintain a price point that is competitive. And if we can't do that, it's probably not going to last. And by the way, these are just my opinions. You're going to get to disagree with me. I love intellectual discord. Oh, but this doesn't love it. There we go. All right. The other thing that I think has been a problem, and I'm saying this as an admission of guilt, actually, because when I first started to look into the space, I thought, oh man, we can do volume reduction and create biochar as an extra thing that we do over here, right? And so if you want volume reduction and you have a hope of making a little bit of biochar, what do? You get an air burner, right? And so we looked into that, and we actually, for our Memphis operation, actually bought an air burner, laid out the $200,000 instead of the $1.2 million. It made sense to me, right? But the problem is, you don't have the same kind of clean, closed burn that you do with a pyrolysis unit, and so you can't use it in every environment from an air quality standpoint. And two, it doesn't really make the biochar that you're hoping you're going to make. You really do need to go through a pyrolysis-like process if you want to get the kind of high-quality biochar that is going to be useful in the maximum amount of markets. And again, what do we need? We need uses on the back end of this thing. And if you make a product that has very, very limited uses, then you're setting yourself up for failure. And so volume reduction is volume reduction. You have to kind of own that that's really what you're doing, and that the biochar that gets created on the backside of that has some other use. It doesn't mean it has no use, but it's probably better to think about using it internally in your operations. You're going to have a tough time selling it, and you're almost certainly not going to get any carbon credits for it. So how about this? I'm just going to throw these three things up. How about this? What if we chose to right-size the local market? What if we said, we're only going to produce enough to satisfy the immediate need, and we're not going to overproduce? Because we're not just pursuing credits, right? We're actually trying to build an industry around biochar. What if we also went to then a distributed operations model? So we know we need to make a lot of this stuff, right? The problem is huge. And strategically, I mean, we're really going where you just talked about, that we need to go from municipality to municipality to municipality. We need to distribute the model so that we can localize the impact of the market and make it achievable to sell this stuff. So if we have a distributed operation, but we have them connected, we still have the potential of aggregating the carbon, but not try to do it all in one place, so that we avoid the transportation and the elevation of cost. And then let's commit to making high quality carbon, biochar. I'm talking about stuff that's north of 90% carbon with 0.7 counts on the H, so or better, lower. So I mean, I think that's what you really want to start thinking about is, if I'm going to get into this space and I'm going to build a business that includes biochar, you need to do it right, build a high quality product. You need to think about scaling, not by making a bigger plant, unless you have a unique thing. Like I was talking to a guy who's doing some work in one of the national forests, and they have just got an enormous amount of material that they're trying to reduce into biochar and then redistribute it within the forest. That makes sense, right? You can go as big as you want in that. But from an industry standpoint, to try to build an industry sector around it, keep that tight, keep your production in a way that is proportionate to the market that is local. So we right-size it to the market. Thanks. So that's my contention. That's my challenge. That's my moment for intellectual discord. And I really raised it here because I know there's a bunch of you out there who really have thought about this for a long time. You've wrestled with it. You want to make this thing happen. Marshall and I had dinner together, and we kicked this thing around hard for a while, just trying to think through the importance of developing a real sustainable market for this material. But maybe you're seeing some things I'm not seeing, and I certainly don't pretend to be the last stop on the train for information on this. So I'm ready for the pushback. Give me your Discord. Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with the principle. Are you actually doing it? I mean, have you made those moves?
Yeah. Yeah, so
Are you using a continuous flow system or a batch?
So we are committed to, we haven't started our first biochar machine yet.
Okay.
All right, we've got the lumber and the composting going. Those are our first two revenue streams.
Right.
And then which is now a good-sized campus in Memphis where we're producing about 1 million board feet a year of lumber, and right now about 15,000 cubic yards of compost. But biochar's next on the list. We have 2 more sites though that are in line. One is in Maryland, outside of Baltimore, and then we just finishing up the design for a wood utilization plan for Washington D.C. And so we think they definitely want to go with a biochar, because we're trying to catch Minneapolis. You know how it is. We want to be the second. We're going to jump in just ahead of Cincinnati, right? So anyway, but my point is that we think that this is not an advertisement, and these guys didn't pay me, but we love the BET machine and the BRD machine. You know, especially that 3100.
That's a continuous flow.
Yep, rotating drum.
Shift. And would you figure out a way using the heat? Would you drive lumber with it?
Yeah, I would love to. Actually, they've got the 2 sites that both have facilities that we could heat, just do district heating with the heat coming off.
Metzler Forest Products uses a BET to do their kiln-dried firewood, right?
Yeah, so Metzler is 90 miles from the Maryland site, and it'll be a very comparable operation. Those guys are rock stars. Yeah.
I would just like to say that equating quality of biochar to the carbon content is a very common misconception.
Oh, thanks.
It can be. It depends on the end use. It's the same thing with the carbon market saying the HC ratio is quality. It really depends on what you're using the biochar for.
I do agree with the use. I just think the higher carbon, from what I understand, the higher carbon has a wider range of uses and can break into more markets. So that's what I get more concerned about is, can I get rid of it, right?
Yeah. I could have a conversation with you.
I would love to get educated on it. I really would.
You're right on the if you're talking about carbon credits, if you have higher carbon, you calculate, the LCAs are the LCAs. I mean, they calculate. So Jeff is right when he says, if you have higher credit on that thing, but you're also right that this for a particular purpose. Carbon isn't the key aspect all the time, but his presentation, I agree with him. It's like if you have higher carbon content, 80% or more, you have many more uses at your disposal, which increases your likelihood of a healthy sales pipeline.
And and the thing is that I would not even dare put a bet down of 50 cents that you're wrong and I'm right. All right? Because that's not my point. I'm looking at it strictly from a business model standpoint, and I think you're looking at it obviously from the science of the actual biochar. And
There's always more than one way to build a business.
yeah, so for me, I'm looking at how do I move it? How do I move it? And I think I've got to create my chances there.
Just coming from a sawmill background, switch to biochar background.
Yeah.
Or you're talking more residential, is that correct? Like, when I look at it from a sawmill basis, our logistics don't work to bring in slash ends or we'll tree tops from the bush on a trucking basis, and that's what that requirement is on those industries versus just utilizing chips and off.
Yeah, we know people that take that approach. It works for us because we have all the equipment on site to handle all the aspects of that operation, and we have one of the best composting guys in the country running our compost side, and one of the better biochar guys consulting on the biochar side. So once it's put in, and then we have a really, really sharp sawmill technical guy too. So we had good players from day one to set each piece of it up and then create a flow through the site. And then we had relationships with the source material, so that they would bring us the material that we wanted in a way that made sense for the operation. But I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of situations where outsourcing makes a ton of sense, or partnering up. We just chose to own the whole thing in this particular case.
I guess my question on it was, were you able to secure that byproduct from slashings for an affordable enough price from, like, with transportation costs to site, or are you just dependent more on residential?
Yeah, mostly on residential, commercial, and land clearers. So the land clearers, like, they go and clear a 40-acre lot, we get a ton of material. Yeah, more than a ton.
One more question.
One more question. It's right here, sorry.
Well, it's more like a follow-up on Kathleen's point. I mean, a lot of what you said made so much sense. I have a tire pack carbonator 6050
Yeah,
attached to a lumber mill. I know all the things that you're talking about. It can make really great biochar, 90%.
That's fantastic.
2C to, ratio, but the inconsistencies do make it challenging for the broader markets, especially building materials. A lot of unburned pieces coming through. So, but yeah, like all the markets are very important. And I think we're focused on ag because that's what's around, and we do need to develop these other markets a lot more.
Agreed.
Before we'll get real traction in that, and hopefully that will help maybe expand.
agreed. I mean, especially concrete, steel, all those, they need it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff.